The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the barren stretch of land, turning the earth into a cracked canvas of browns and grays. Caleb McKenna pulled his worn hat lower over his eyes, squinting against the glare as his horse picked its way through the rocky terrain. His beard, thick with dust and neglect, hadn't seen a razor in weeks. That was fine by him. The less recognizable he was, the better. He'd been riding hard for 3 days, putting distance between himself and the last town where someone had given him that look, the one that said they'd seen his face before, probably on a wanted poster. $500 was enough money to make even honest folk consider turning bounty hunter. Caleb touched the Colt at his hip, a reflexive gesture born from too many close calls. The horizon shimmered with heat mirages, playing tricks on a man's eyes. But that dark smudge growing on the eastern ridge wasn't his imagination. Caleb reined in his mount, a sturdy bay mare he'd bought with his last poker winnings, and studied the approaching wall of dust. A storm was brewing, the kind that could bury a man alive if he wasn't careful. He'd need shelter, and soon. Caleb urged his horse forward, scanning the landscape for any outcropping or ravine that might offer protection. That's when he saw it. An overturned carriage lying like a broken toy against a cluster of boulders, one wheel still spinning lazily in the wind. As he drew closer, Caleb's trained eye took in the details: fine craftsmanship, brass fittings that caught the light despite the dust coating. This was no farmer's wagon. The matched pair of horses that should have been pulling it were nowhere to be seen, likely spooked and long gone. But it was the flash of blue fabric among the wreckage that made him dismount. The woman lay motionless in the shadow of the overturned carriage, her fine dress torn and dusty, but still speaking of wealth and position. Dark hair had come loose from what must have been an elaborate arrangement, spilling across the dirt like spilled ink. Caleb knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her chest rose and fell, shallow, but steady. He glanced around, half expecting this to be some kind of trap. It wouldn't be the first time someone used a woman as bait for unsuspecting travelers. But the storm was real enough, already beginning to kick up dust devils in the distance. Whatever had happened here, he couldn't leave her to face what was coming. Caleb gathered the unconscious woman in his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite the layers of fabric. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s. Her face, even slack in unconsciousness, had a refinement that spoke of easy living and careful tending, a world away from his own weathered existence. He spotted a promising rock formation about a quarter-mile north, a natural shelter formed by wind-carved stone. By the time he'd carried her there, his horse following behind, the first winds of the storm were beginning to howl. Caleb worked quickly, using his bedroll and the canvas from his pack to create a makeshift tent against the rock face. It wasn't much, but it would keep the worst of the storm at bay. The woman stirred as he settled her on his blanket, her eyelids fluttering. Caleb retreated to a respectful distance, busying himself with seeing to his horse and checking their supplies. He had water, not much, but enough if they were careful. Some hardtack and jerky, too. Not exactly fair for a lady, but it would keep them alive. When she finally came to fully, the storm was in full fury outside their shelter. Her eyes, green as spring grass, went wide with panic before focusing on him. "Easy there, ma'am," Caleb said, keeping his voice low and calm, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "You're safe. Found you by an overturned carriage. Storm drove us to shelter." She tried to sit up too quickly, gasped, and pressed a hand to her head. "My carriage. The horses." Her voice had a cultured quality, each word precisely formed despite her distress. "Horses are gone. I'm afraid carriage isn't going anywhere without repair." Caleb uncapped his canteen, offered it to her. "Small sips now. Don't know how long you were out there." She took the canteen with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from weakness or fear, he couldn't tell. After a few careful sips, she seemed to gather herself, that initial panic settling into something more like wariness. "I'm Mrs. Graham Cartwright," she said, as if the name should mean something to him. My husband owns the Red Hollow Bank and Trust. Caleb nodded, filing the information away. Red Hollow was maybe 2 days' ride east. He'd been planning to skirt around it entirely. Towns with banks meant law enforcement, and law enforcement meant trouble for a man in his position. Caleb, he offered in return, deliberately leaving off his surname. You remember what happened? She touched her temple gingerly. The horses, something spooked them. A snake, perhaps. Everything happened so quickly. Her eyes darkened with something that might have been memory, or might have been something else entirely. My husband suggested I take some air, for my health. The way she said it, carefully neutral, made Caleb wonder what kind of air a banker's wife needed to find in the middle of nowhere. But he kept his questions to himself. Everyone had their secrets out here. The storm raged on, turning day into an early twilight. Caleb set about making their shelter as comfortable as possible, acutely aware of the propriety issues, but more concerned with survival. He'd seen what these dust storms could do to a person caught in the open. You're not from around here, she said after a while, watching him work. No, ma'am, just passing through. To where? Wherever the trail leads. She studied him with those sharp green eyes. That's not really an answer. It's the only one I've got. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I suppose we all have our reasons for being where we are. As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, they shared what little food he had. She ate the hardtack without complaint, though he could see it was nothing like what she was used to. They talked carefully, dancing around truths neither seemed eager to share. She spoke of Red Hollow, of the society there, of the endless social obligations that came with being a banker's wife. But there were gaps in her words, silences that spoke louder than anything she said. Must be worried about you, Caleb observed. Your husband. Something flickered across her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Yes, I'm sure he is. The wind howled outside their shelter. But inside, a different kind of tension was building. Not the dangerous kind Caleb was used to, but something more subtle. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. The careful distance they both maintained in the small space. You're not what I expected, she said suddenly. What's that supposed to mean? When I woke up and saw you, I thought... She shook her head. You could have robbed me, left me there. Worse. I'm no saint, ma'am, but I'm not that kind of man either. What kind of man are you then? It was a question he'd been asking himself for years. The kind that keeps moving, he said finally. She pulled his coat closer around her shoulders. He'd insisted she take it when the temperature began to drop. That sounds lonely. Sometimes. He met her eyes across the small space. But lonely's better than some alternatives. She didn't ask what he meant, and he was grateful for it. Outside, the storm began to show signs of weakening. Come morning, they'd need to move. He'd get her back to Red Hollow, back to her banker husband and her proper life. Then he'd disappear again. Just another ghost in the territories. But for now, in this moment, with the storm raging outside and this unexpected woman watching him with eyes that seemed to see too much, Caleb allowed himself to forget about the morning, about the wanted posters, about the miles of running that stretched behind and ahead of him. Tell me about freedom, she said softly. So quietly, he almost missed it over the wind. Don't know much about that either, he admitted. Just know what it's not. And what's that? He thought about it, choosing his words carefully. It's not having every step decided for you, not living in fear of being yourself, not... He paused, looking at her. Not being trapped in a life that's killing you slow. Her breath caught, just slightly, in the lamplight. He could see tears gathering in her eyes, though none fell. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly what it's not. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber as they made their way east toward Red Hollow. Caleb had fashioned a makeshift saddle arrangement so Evelyn could ride with him, her carriage being beyond any immediate repair. She sat sideways in front of him, maintaining as much propriety as the situation allowed, though the necessity of his arm around her waist to keep her steady created an intimacy neither acknowledged aloud. They'd been riding for hours when the heat became oppressive. Evelyn had long since given up pretending she wasn't exhausted, her head occasionally drooping back against his shoulder before she caught herself. It was during one of his regular surveys of the landscape that Caleb spotted it, a thin column of steam rising from a cluster of rocks to the south. "Hot springs," he said, pointing. "Might be a good place to rest. Let the horse drink." She nodded wearily. The springs, when they reached them, were a small miracle in the harsh landscape. Clear water bubbled up from the earth, creating a series of small pools surrounded by smooth stones and hardy desert plants that thrived in the moisture. Caleb helped her dismount, noting how she winced when her feet touched the ground. "You should soak your feet," he suggested. "Those fancy shoes weren't made for this kind of travel." She looked at him with a mixture of longing and hesitation. "I couldn't. It wouldn't be—" "I'll see to the horse," he said, turning away. "Take your time." He busied himself with unnecessary tasks, checking the saddle, examining the horse's hooves, anything to give her privacy while staying close enough to ensure her safety. He could hear the soft splash of water, a quiet sigh of relief, despite himself. He glanced back once and caught sight of her silhouette against the rocks. She'd removed her outer dress, sitting in her chemise with her feet and lower legs submerged in the warm water. The morning light caught in her loosened hair, and for a moment she looked like something out of a dream. She must have sensed his gaze because she turned slightly, not quite looking at him but acknowledging his presence. "You're the first person to look at me like I'm human," she said quietly, echoing words that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Caleb forced himself to look away again, uncomfortable with the raw honesty in her voice. "Everyone's human, ma'am, not in Red Hollow." The bitterness in her tone was sharp as alkali. "There, I'm an ornament, a possession, something to be displayed and managed." He moved closer but kept his back turned, giving her the illusion of privacy while they talked. "That why you were out there alone, taking air for your health?" A short, humorless laugh. "My husband's idea of caring for my welfare. He thought some time away would improve my disposition. And would it? Being half dead in the desert? No." A pause. "Being found by you? That's different." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical thing. Caleb knew he should deflect, keep things light and distant. Instead, he found himself saying, "You don't know anything about me. I know enough." Water splashed softly. "I know you could have taken advantage and didn't. I know you gave me your coat, your food, your water. I know you look at me and see a person, not a prize or a problem. That's a low bar to clear. You'd be surprised how many fail to clear it." They continued on after she'd dressed and composed herself, the hot springs already feeling like a distant dream. As they drew closer to Red Hollow, the landscape began to change. The raw wilderness gave way to signs of civilization: fence posts, cattle trails, the occasional distant rider who Caleb carefully avoided. It was late afternoon when the town finally came into view, nestled in a valley like a cluster of wooden boxes. Even from a distance, Caleb could identify the bank, a 2-story brick building that stood out among the more modest structures. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to drop her at the edge of town and disappear. But something kept him riding forward. They were spotted long before they reached the main street. A group of riders came thundering out to meet them, led by a man whose expensive clothes and air of authority marked him as someone important. Graham Cartwright, Caleb assumed, taking in the man's cold gray eyes and the way his gaze moved over his wife like she was inventory being checked. "Evelyn," Graham said, his tone carrying more irritation than relief. "We've been searching everywhere. My carriage overturned in the storm," she replied, her voice taking on a different quality, smaller, more careful. "This gentleman was kind enough to assist me." Graham's attention shifted to Caleb, those cold eyes narrowing with suspicion. "And you are?" "Just a traveler." Caleb said evenly. Glad I could help. Yes, well, Graham gestured to one of his men. See that he's compensated for his trouble. That's not necessary, Caleb began, but Graham had already dismissed him, turning his attention back to his wife. You look a fright. We'll get you home and cleaned up before anyone sees you like this. He reached for her, and Caleb noticed how she flinched, just slightly. One of Graham's men produced a small leather pouch, holding it out to Caleb. Mr. Cartwright's thanks. Caleb wanted to refuse, but drawing more attention to himself would be foolish. He took the pouch with a nod, watching as Graham helped Evelyn onto a fresh horse. She looked back once, just before they rode away, and in her green eyes he saw something that might have been gratitude or might have been goodbye. The sensible thing would be to leave immediately, take the money, resupply, and put Red Hollow behind him as fast as possible. Instead, Caleb found himself riding into town, telling himself he just needed provisions, a meal, maybe a drink to wash the dust from his throat. The saloon was like dozens of others he'd known. Dim, smoky, filled with the sounds of cards and conversation. He ordered whiskey and found a corner table where he could watch the room. That's when he saw it, tacked to the wall among other notices and advertisements, his own face staring back at him from a wanted poster. Caleb McKenna, it read. Wanted for murder. $500 reward. The likeness was good enough to be dangerous. He pulled his hat lower and considered his options. The smart play was to finish his drink and ride out before full dark. But something kept him in that chair, some unnamed feeling he didn't want to examine too closely. Near midnight, as he was finally preparing to leave, a young Mexican woman approached his table. She glanced around nervously before dropping a small envelope in front of him and disappearing into the crowd. The paper was expensive, the handwriting feminine and refined. Behind the Cartwright house, there is a garden with white roses. If you would grant me the kindness of a proper farewell, I will be there at midnight tomorrow. Please burn this. Caleb read it twice before holding the corner to the candle flame, watching her words turn to ash. He should leave town immediately, should forget about green eyes and white roses and the way she'd looked at him like he was something more than a wanted man. But as he stepped out into the cool night air, Caleb knew he wouldn't. Some mistakes, he was beginning to think, might be worth making. The next night found him in shadows, moving carefully through the quiet streets of Red Hollow. The Cartwright house was easy to find, the largest residential building in town, all brick and imported glass. The garden was where she'd said it would be, rows of white roses glowing pale in the moonlight. She was waiting, wrapped in a dark cloak that couldn't quite hide the quality of the dress beneath. When she saw him, her face transformed with something that looked dangerously close to joy. I wasn't sure you'd come, she whispered. Neither was I. They stood there in the moonlight, neither seeming to know what came next. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixing with the scent of roses. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, and to tell you, to warn you, my husband is suspicious. He's been asking questions about you. I figured as much. You should leave, tonight. Planning on it. Good. But she didn't step back. Instead, she raised one hand slowly, as if afraid he might bolt, and touched his cheek. Her fingers were soft against his weather-roughened skin, and Caleb found himself closing his eyes at the contact. Evelyn, he said, her name a warning. I know, she whispered. I know all the reasons this is impossible, but I've been dead inside for so long, and you made me remember what it feels like to be alive. He caught her hand in his, meaning to pull it away. Instead, he found himself holding it, studying the fine bones, the pale skin that had never known hard work. Everything about her was wrong for him, and he for her. But standing there in that garden, with the roses heavy with scent and her eyes bright with unshed tears, right and wrong seemed like concepts from another world. This can't go anywhere good, he said. I know. Your husband is a monster in gentleman's clothes. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for years. But he owns me just the same, just like he owns the bank and the sheriff and half this town. Caleb touched her face then, just the lightest brush of his fingers, and she leaned into it like a flower seeking sun. They stood that way for a long moment, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything if they let it. "Go," she finally whispered, though her hand still clutched his. "Go and don't look back." He nodded, stepped away. But at the garden gate, he turned back, unable to help himself. She stood among the white roses like a ghost, beautiful and untouchable and already fading into memory. "Be well, Evelyn Cartwright," he said. "Be free, Caleb McKenna," she replied, and he realized she'd known his full name all along, the morning after their garden encounter. Evelyn sat at her dressing table while her maid arranged her hair. In the mirror, she could see the faint bruise on her upper arm where Graham had gripped her the night before, demanding to know every detail of her time with that drifter. She'd given him the facts: the overturned carriage, the storm, the rescue, while carefully omitting the truth of how Caleb had looked at her, spoken to her, made her feel human again. "Will you be needing anything else, ma'am?" her maid asked. "No, thank you. Mary." Evelyn waited until she was alone before pulling out her husband's leather ledger from behind her jewelry box. She'd discovered it months ago while searching for headache powders in his study. The columns of numbers had meant little to her at first, but gradually she'd pieced together their meaning. Bribes paid, debts collected with interest that would crush a family, loans given to desperate people with terms that ensured they'd never escape. Graham controlled Red Hollow through the bank, and the bank was built on others' misery. She'd tried to forget what she'd learned, to continue playing the role of the dutiful wife, but something about meeting Caleb, about seeing what freedom looked like, even in a hunted man, had crystallized her resolve. Meanwhile, Caleb had taken work at the postal relay station on the outskirts of town. It was dangerous to stay so close to Red Hollow, but something kept him tethered. He told himself it was practical. The job paid cash, no questions asked, and gave him a legitimate reason to be in the area while he planned his next move. The work was simple enough: help sort mail, tend the horses, repair tack. The station master, an old Confederate soldier named Samuel Briggs, didn't care about a man's past as long as he did his job. But Caleb caught the occasional side-eye from travelers passing through, the kind of look that said they'd seen his face somewhere before. It was during his third week at the station that she came to him. The rain had started at dusk, a steady downpour that turned the roads to mud and sent everyone with sense indoors. Caleb was alone in the small shack he rented behind the station, cleaning his rifle by lamplight, when he heard the knock. He knew who it was before he opened the door, something in the tentative nature of the sound, the way it came again when he didn't immediately answer. Evelyn stood in the rain, soaked through despite her cloak. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face, and she was shivering, but her eyes burned with determination. "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as he stepped aside to let her in. "I had nowhere else to go." She pushed back her hood, water streaming onto the rough wooden floor. "I need your help." He handed her a blanket, trying not to notice how the wet fabric clung to her form. "What's happened?" "I took something from my husband, something that could destroy him." She pulled a wrapped bundle from inside her cloak. "These are records of his illegal dealings, bribes to the sheriff, the judge, loans with terms that violate federal usury laws, evidence that he's been stealing from depositors." Caleb stared at the bundle like it was a live rattlesnake. "Why bring this to me? Because you're the only person in 100 miles who isn't owned by him." She was still shivering, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. "I was going to mail them to the federal marshals, but Graham has men watching the post office, the telegraph. I don't know what else to do." "This is dangerous. Evelyn, if he finds out, he'll kill me." She said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. "He's beaten me before for less, but I can't live like this anymore. Watching him destroy families, knowing I'm part of it just by being his wife." Thunder crashed overhead, and she flinched, Caleb moved without thinking, putting his hands on her shoulders to steady her. The blanket slipped, and suddenly they were standing too close, rain-soaked and aware of every breath. "I should go," she whispered, making no move to leave. "Stay until the rain stops," he heard himself say. She looked up at him, and he saw the moment she made her decision, rising on her toes. She pressed her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of rain and desperation and freedom. For a heartbeat, he held himself still, knowing this was a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as years of loneliness and running crashed over him like a flash flood. They broke apart, breathing hard. "Caleb," she said, and his name on her lips was like a prayer and a curse combined. "This is madness," he said, though his hands still framed her face. "Yes." She turned her head to kiss his palm. "But I've been living in madness disguised as respectability. At least this madness is honest." The rain drummed on the roof as they stood there, caught between desire and disaster. Finally, Caleb stepped back, though it took every ounce of will he possessed. "You need to get warm," he said roughly. "I'll build up the fire." She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. While he tended the fire, she studied his sparse quarters, a narrow bed, a small table, his few possessions arranged with military precision. "You live like someone ready to run at any moment," she observed. "Because I am." "What did you do? The poster said murder, but I don't believe you're a cold-blooded killer." He added another log to the fire, watching the flames catch. "My younger brother, James, he was barely 18. Got into a card game in Nevada with some men who didn't like losing to a kid. They waited for him outside, 4 against 1. I tried to pull them off, but one drew a knife. You were protecting him. The man I killed had friends, important friends. They made sure the law saw it their way." He turned to look at her. "I've been running for 3 years. And James, safe, has a little farm in Oregon now. Writes me sometimes, through people who know people." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Says he named his firstborn after me. Poor kid." Evelyn moved closer to the fire. Closer to him. "You're a good man, Caleb McKenna." "No, just a man trying to be less bad than he could be. That's more than most manage." They talked through the night as the rain continued to fall. She told him about her marriage, arranged by her father to settle debts. Graham's gradual transformation from cold courtesy to casual cruelty. He told her about life on the run, the towns that blurred together, the constant looking over his shoulder. "We could leave," she said suddenly, the words hanging between them like a challenge. "Together, take these documents to the federal office in Denver, then disappear. Mexico, maybe, or California." "You don't know what you're saying. Life on the run isn't romantic. Evelyn, it's hard and ugly and dangerous. And life as Graham Cartwright's wife is silk-lined hell." She moved to kneel beside his chair, looking up at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "I'm already dying, Caleb, slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. At least running with you would be living." He touched her face, unable to help himself. She caught his hand, pressed it against her cheek. "Please," she whispered. "I know it's selfish. I know I'm asking you to risk everything, but I—" He silenced her with a kiss, softer this time, tinged with the sorrow of impossible things. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let me think," he said. "Come back in 2 nights. I'll have an answer." She nodded, rising gracefully despite the damp clothes and emotional weight of the evening. At the door, she paused. "Whatever you decide, know this, you've given me more kindness in a few weeks than I've known in years. That's a gift I'll carry whether you say yes or no." After she left, Caleb sat staring at the bundle of documents she'd entrusted to him. Evidence that could bring down Graham Cartwright, free Evelyn, maybe even clear a path for them to have something together. But using it would mean stepping out of the shadows, risking exposure. He thought about his brother in Oregon, safe because Caleb had paid the price for protecting him. He thought about all the miles he'd run, all the nights spent watching the darkness for pursuers. Then he thought about green eyes and white roses and a woman brave enough to risk everything for a chance at freedom. As dawn broke over Red Hollow, Caleb McKenna made his decision. Some things, he realized, were worth stopping running for, even if it meant facing whatever consequences came with standing still. The abandoned mine shaft sat 3 miles north of Red Hollow, a relic from the silver boom that had gone bust a decade earlier. It had become their sanctuary, a place where stolen hours could exist outside the reach of prying eyes and social judgment. Caleb had discovered it while scouting escape routes, always planning, always preparing for the run that might come any day. Now it served a different purpose. Evelyn arrived as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. She'd traded her fine dresses for simpler clothing borrowed from her maid, a plain cotton skirt and blouse that let her ride without the impediment of countless petticoats. The transformation made her seem younger, more alive. "You came," she said, dismounting with growing confidence. These secret meetings had taught her skills no banker's wife was supposed to need. "Did you doubt I would?" "Every time." She moved into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Every time I leave, I wonder if you'll decide I'm not worth the risk." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender soap mixed with desert sage from the ride. "You're worth it," he said against her temple. "That's what scares me." They'd been meeting like this for 2 months now, stolen afternoons and dangerous nights. Each encounter was a careful dance of desire and restraint, passion and prudence. They talked, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never given anyone else. Sometimes they just sat together in silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. Tonight felt different. There was an urgency in the way she kissed him, a desperation in how her hands clutched at his shirt. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling back to study her face. "Graham knows something. He's been watching me, having me followed. Yesterday I found him going through my things." Her voice trembled. "I've hidden the ledgers, but if he finds them..." "We leave, tonight. He has men at all the roads out of town. We'd never make it past the county line." Caleb's mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds and escape routes. "The church social is in 3 days. Half the town will be there, including Graham. It's our best chance. And until then, we're careful. We play our parts." He cupped her face in his hands. "Can you do that? Can you pretend for 3 more days?" She nodded, though tears sparkled in her eyes. "I've been pretending my whole life. What's 3 more days?" They sought comfort in each other then, kisses growing heated, hands becoming bold. When Evelyn began unbuttoning his shirt with trembling fingers, Caleb caught her wrists gently. "Evelyn, please." Her green eyes blazed with need. "I've been owned my whole life, first by my father, then by Graham, just once. I want to choose. I choose you. Caleb, I choose this." He searched her face, seeing determination mixed with desire. "You're sure?" Instead of answering with words, she began unbuttoning her own blouse, her gaze never leaving his. In the lamplight of their hidden sanctuary, she transformed from the untouchable banker's wife into simply a woman reaching for her lover. They came together with a passion born of desperation and tenderness, of too much waiting and not enough time. On a bed of blankets spread over hay, they discovered each other with the wonder of new lovers and the urgency of those who knew tomorrow was never promised. Every touch was a rebellion, every whispered endearment a declaration of independence from the lives that bound them. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The night sounds of the desert drifted through the mine entrance, coyotes calling, wind sighing through sage. "Tell me about Mexico," she said softly. "Never been there myself, but I hear there are towns along the coast where a man can disappear, where nobody asks about your past if you don't cause trouble in the present. We could have a little house. I could take in sewing work. You could break horses or work cattle. That's a hard life, Evelyn. Nothing like what you're used to." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with fierce determination. "I'd rather wash clothes in a Mexican river than wear silk in Graham's prison." He pulled her down for a kiss, slow and deep. When they parted, he said, 3 days, then we run. Over the following days, they met twice more, unable to stay away despite the danger. Each time, they lost themselves in each other with increasing abandon, as if trying to store up enough passion to last whatever came next. They made plans, which routes to take, what supplies they'd need, how to maximize their head start. It was during their final meeting before the church social that Evelyn made her confession. "I need to tell you something," she said as they dressed in the pre-dawn darkness. "About Graham. About why I really took those ledgers." Caleb paused in pulling on his boots. "I figured you had your reasons." "He killed my father." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Oh, not with his own hands." "But he destroyed him just the same. Papa had debts. You see, gambling. Graham offered to help, to save the family honor. The terms seemed generous at first. But they weren't. The interest compounded faster than Papa could pay. Graham offered him a way out, marry me to him, and the debt would disappear. Papa refused at first. He wasn't a perfect father, but he loved me. Graham made sure his business failed. His friends abandoned him. In the end, Papa put a gun in his mouth rather than face complete ruin. Evelyn. I was 18. Graham swooped in like a savior, offering to take care of everything if I'd accept his proposal. My mother begged me to say yes. We had nothing left. She turned to face him, eyes dry but burning. I've been planning my revenge ever since. Those ledgers were just the beginning. I was going to destroy him the way he destroyed my father. But then I met you. And suddenly revenge didn't matter as much as freedom, as much as living. She touched his face. You saved me from becoming like him, from letting hatred poison me until there was nothing left but bitterness. Caleb kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. We're going to get out of here. Together. Leave Graham and his ledgers for the federal marshals to sort out. Promise me something, she said. If anything goes wrong, if we get separated, you run. Don't try to be noble. Don't try to save me. Just run. Evelyn, promise me. He saw the fear in her eyes, the knowledge of what Graham was capable of. I promise. He lied. As dawn broke over the desert, they parted with lingering kisses and whispered reassurances. In 3 days, they told each other. In 3 days, their new life would begin. Neither of them could have known that Graham Cartwright had already found the ledgers, that he'd followed his wife the night before, watched from the shadows as she entered the mine, waited with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was already trapped. As Evelyn rode back toward Red Hollow, toward the house that had become her prison, Graham stood at his study window, watching her approach. In his hand, he held a telegram from a contact in the territorial capital. It contained interesting information about one Caleb McKenna and the price on his head. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, my dear, he murmured to the glass. It's about to become very expensive. The church social was in 3 days. Graham smiled coldly and began making his own plans. After all, a man didn't build an empire in the desert without knowing how to deal with threats to his property. And his wife, whatever her delusions, was very much his property. The game was set. The players had chosen their moves. All that remained was to see who would be left standing when the dust settled over Red Hollow. The saloon was busier than usual for a Tuesday night. Cowboys, merchants, and drifters mingled in the smoky haze, the air thick with tobacco and cheap whiskey. Caleb sat at his usual corner table, nursing a drink and keeping his hat low. 2 days until the church social. 2 days until freedom. He'd noticed the whispers starting that afternoon, men glancing his way, conversations stopping when he passed. His instincts, honed by years of running, screamed danger, but leaving now would mean abandoning Evelyn, and that was something he couldn't do. The batwing doors swung open, admitting Jake Morrison, a mean drunk who fancied himself a gunfighter. Jake's eyes swept the room until they landed on Caleb, and an ugly grin split his face. Well, well, boys, look what we got here. Jake swaggered over. his hand hovering near his pistol. "You know what this fellow is, a genuine killer. $500 worth of wanted man, sitting pretty as you please." The saloon went quiet. Caleb set down his glass carefully, calculating angles and distances. "You're drunk, Morrison. Sleep it off." "Oh, I'm drunk all right, but not too drunk to recognize Caleb McKenna when I see him." Jake's voice rose. "Murdered a man in cold blood in Nevada. There's paper on him. Boys, $500 to whoever brings him in." "You've got the wrong man," Caleb said evenly, though his muscles tensed for action. "Do I?" Jake pulled out a folded wanted poster, slapping it on the table. "Looks mighty similar to me. Same height, same build. Bet if we scraped off some of that trail dust, we'd find the same face too." The other patrons were backing away now, creating a circle of empty space around them. Caleb saw the bartender reaching under the bar. For a shotgun, most likely. "I don't want trouble," Caleb said. "Too bad. Trouble found you." Jake's hand moved toward his gun. Caleb was faster. His Colt cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion, the bullet catching Jake's gun hand just as it gripped the pistol butt. Jake screamed, his weapon clattering across the floor as he clutched his wounded hand. "Anyone else?" Caleb asked the room, his gun steady. Silence answered him. He backed toward the door, keeping his weapon drawn. As he reached the entrance, a voice called out, "McKenna!" Sheriff Tom Bradley stood in the street, flanked by 2 deputies. The lawman was one of the few in Red Hollow not owned by Graham Cartwright, an honest man in a dishonest town. "Sheriff," Caleb acknowledged, not lowering his gun. "I'm going to need you to come with me. Son, we'll sort this out peaceable-like." "Can't do that. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Drop the gun. We'll verify your identity. If you're not McKenna, you'll be free to go." Caleb almost laughed. They both knew how that would end. "Sorry, Sheriff." He dove sideways as the deputies opened fire, rolling behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood above his head. The street erupted in chaos. Horses rearing, townspeople scattering. More guns joining the fray as Jake's friends decided to try for the bounty. Caleb ran, weaving between buildings, using every trick 3 years of running had taught him. Bullets whined past, shattering windows and sending chips of brick flying. He vaulted a fence, cut through someone's garden, emerged onto a side street where his horse waited. As he swung into the saddle, his only thought was Evelyn. Their plan was ruined. The law would be watching every road, every trail. But he couldn't leave without warning her, without saying goodbye. The Cartwright house was ablaze with lights despite the late hour. As Evelyn descended the stairs, she could hear Graham's voice from his study, along with several others. Her blood chilled when she recognized Sheriff Bradley's distinctive drawl. "Shot his way out of town not 2 hours ago. We've got men on all the roads." "Unfortunate." Graham's voice was smooth as oil. "Though I must say, I'm not entirely surprised. There was something unsavory about that drifter from the start." "Ma'am." The sheriff noticed her in the doorway, touching his hat. "Sorry to disturb your evening." "What's happened?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice remained. "That fellow who brought you back to town, turns out he's a wanted killer. Caleb McKenna. Ring any bells?" She shook her head, aware of Graham's eyes on her. "He only told me his first name. Is anyone hurt?" "Jake Morrison took a bullet in the hand. He'll live." The sheriff studied her closely. "You're lucky, ma'am." Man like that, no telling what he might have done. "Yes," she said faintly. "Very lucky." "We'll catch him," one of the deputies said. "Can't have gone far." Graham stood, moving to put a possessive arm around her waist. "Gentlemen, I think my wife has heard enough. This whole ordeal has been very trying for her delicate constitution." After the lawmen left, Graham's grip on her arm tightened painfully. He steered her into his study, closing the door with deliberate care. "Did you think I was a fool?" he asked conversationally. "I don't know what you mean." The blow came without warning. Snapping her head to the side, She tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. "Don't lie to me." He gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his cold gray eyes. "I know about your meetings, your sordid little affair with that criminal. You're imagining things." He smiled then, and it was worse than his anger. Reaching into his desk, he pulled out the ledgers she'd hidden. "Looking for these? I must admit, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had the spine for theft. Those prove what you really are," she said, dropping all pretense. "A thief and a murderer, just with cleaner hands than the man you're hunting. Perhaps, but I'm also your husband, and you've forgotten what that means." He moved to the window, gazing out at the darkness. "Your lover will try to contact you. When he does, you'll send him to the old garrison mine at midnight tomorrow. Tell him you'll meet him there to run away together. I won't help you trap him." "Oh, but you will." He turned back, his smile widening. "You see, my dear, I've already sent word to Judge Harper about McKenna's unfortunate interest in my wife. How he forced his attentions on you, threatened you. When we capture him at the mine, and we will capture him, you'll testify to his harassment, your word against a wanted killer's. No one will believe that. Won't they? A respected businessman's wife, coerced by a dangerous criminal? The judge owes me considerable sums. He'll believe whatever I tell him to believe." Evelyn felt the walls closing in. "And if I refuse? Then both you and your lover will have unfortunate accidents. The desert is dangerous, after all. So many ways to die out there." He moved closer, trailing a finger down her bruised cheek. "But if you cooperate, McKenna will simply hang for his crimes in Nevada, quick and clean. Really, I'm being quite generous." She jerked away from his touch. "You're a monster. I'm a businessman. And you, my dear, are an asset that's depreciated considerably. After this is resolved, we'll discuss your future usefulness." He opened the study door. "You're confined to your room until further notice. Mary will bring your meals." As she climbed the stairs on trembling legs, Evelyn's mind raced. Caleb was out there somewhere, hunted and desperate. Graham expected her to betray him, to lure him to his death. The ledgers were gone, her proof destroyed. Every avenue of escape seemed blocked. But as she entered her room, her eyes fell on the window. The trellis below was sturdy, meant to support climbing roses. She'd noticed it weeks ago, filing it away as a possibility. Now it might be her only chance. She had to warn Caleb, had to find him before he tried to contact her and walked into Graham's trap. The thought of what they'd do to him, not just hanging, but whatever creative cruelties Graham would devise first, made her physically ill. Moving quietly, she changed into her darkest dress, pinned her hair tightly, and wrapped herself in a black shawl. Then she waited, listening to the house settle around her, counting the minutes until the last light went out in Graham's study. At midnight, she eased open the window. The climb down was terrifying, her hands shaking, petticoats catching on the thorns. But desperation gave her strength. She dropped the last few feet, landing hard in the flower bed. The streets were empty, the town sleeping off the excitement of the evening's gunfight. She kept to shadows, making her way to the only place she could think Caleb might go, their secret mine. She was half a mile from town when she heard horses approaching. There was nowhere to hide on the open road. The riders surrounded her quickly, 3 of Graham's men, led by his foreman, Bill Hackett. "Evening, Mrs. Cartwright." Hackett touched his hat mockingly. "Bit late for a stroll." "I needed air," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Sure you did. Boss figured you might try something foolish. Asked us to keep an eye out." He leaned down from his saddle. "Time to go home now. Wouldn't want you catching cold." They escorted her back like a prisoner, which she supposed she was. Graham was waiting in the entrance hall, still fully dressed, predictable to the end. He said, "Bill, double the guard. My wife seems to be suffering from hysteria. We can't have her wandering off again." As they marched her back to her room, Evelyn caught sight of herself in the hall mirror, hair disheveled, dress torn from the roses. eyes wild with fear and fury. She looked like a madwoman. Perhaps that's what love was, a kind of madness that made you climb from windows and defy men who could destroy you. A madness that made a banker's wife fall for a wanted man, and made that wanted man stay when every instinct should have sent him running. Tomorrow. Graham would force her to write the letter. Tomorrow. Caleb might die because of her, unless she found another way. The morning brought snow, unusual for this time of year, coating Red Hollow in a deceptive blanket of purity. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, watching the flakes fall, when Mary arrived with breakfast and an unwelcome visitor. Mrs. Cartwright. Graham entered behind the maid, dismissing her with a wave. "You'll write that letter now. And if I refuse?" He produced a telegram from his pocket. "From my associate in Nevada. It seems your lover left quite a trail. A saloon girl named Rosa who helped him escape. Pretty thing, according to my sources. Currently working in an establishment in Carson City." His smile was reptilian. Accidents happen to such women all the time. Evelyn's hands clenched. "You wouldn't. I protect my investments and eliminate my problems. The girl means nothing to me either way. Her fate, like McKenna's, rests entirely in your hands." Defeated, she sat at her writing desk. Graham dictated while she wrote, each word a betrayal. "My dearest, I have managed to escape Graham's watch. Meet me at the Garrison mine at midnight tomorrow. We can still run. Come alone. Trust no one. All my love. E." Perfect. Graham took the letter, examining her handwriting. "Bill will ensure this reaches McKenna through the appropriate channels. We've already spread word that you're looking for him, desperate to run away. He'll believe it. He's not stupid. He'll know it's a trap. Perhaps, but will he stay away? A man in love does foolish things." He moved to the door, pausing. "You'll attend the church social tomorrow as planned. Smile. Play the devoted wife. Any deviation, and that girl in Carson City has an unfortunate evening. Understood?" After he left, Evelyn paced her room like a caged animal. The snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the town. She had to warn Caleb, but how? Every servant was watching her, guards posted at every exit. Then she remembered. The church social. Half the town would be there, including most of Graham's men. In the chaos of preparation and attendance, there might be a chance. Caleb crouched in the abandoned prospector's shack 5 miles north of town, watching the snow cover his tracks. He'd been moving between hiding spots for 2 days, staying ahead of the search parties. His supplies were running low, but leaving the area meant abandoning Evelyn. The knock on the door was so soft he almost missed it. His hand went to his gun as a figure slipped inside. Not Evelyn, but her maid, Mary. "Mr. McKenna," she whispered, producing a letter. "She said you'd be here." He took it with trembling hands, recognizing Evelyn's writing. But as he read, his jaw tightened. The words were hers, but the message felt wrong, too convenient, too perfect a solution. "When did she give you this?" "This morning, sir. She's not well. Mr. Cartwright has her locked in her room. Says she's hysterical." Mary's voice dropped. "We all know what he is, sir, what he does, but we need our positions." Caleb studied the girl's face, seeing fear but also genuine concern. "Is she hurt?" "Some bruises. Nothing that won't heal." Mary glanced nervously at the door. "I should go. They'll miss me." "Wait." He pulled out a pencil, scribbling quickly on a scrap of paper. "Can you get this to her?" Mary hesitated, then nodded. After she left, Caleb read Evelyn's letter again. The Garrison mine, isolated, only one way in or out, perfect for an ambush. Graham must have forced her to write it, but knowing it was a trap didn't change anything. Evelyn was prisoner, possibly hurt, certainly in danger. He couldn't rescue her from the house. Too many guards. But if Graham was expecting him at the mine, most of his men would be there. The house would be vulnerable. It was a slim chance, but better than abandoning her to Graham's mercy. The church social began at 4 o'clock, the snow having stopped but leaving the streets a muddy mess. Evelyn played her part perfectly, smiling, chatting about inconsequential things, Graham's hand possessive on her elbow. "You're doing wonderfully, my dear," he murmured during a break in conversations. "Keep this up, and your friend in Carson City stays healthy." She wanted to scratch his eyes out. Instead, she laughed at something the mayor's wife said, agreed that yes, the weather had been quite unusual. Wasn't the pastor's sermon last week inspiring? As the evening wore on, she noticed Graham's men beginning to slip away. First one, then another, until only a skeleton crew remained. Her heart sank. They were heading to the mine, to set their trap for Caleb. It was during the hymn singing that Mary appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, you dropped this," she said, pressing a handkerchief into Evelyn's hand. Inside the fabric was a tiny slip of paper. Evelyn's heart raced as she recognized Caleb's writing. "I know. Be ready. Trust Mary." She glanced at her maid, who gave an almost imperceptible nod before melting back into the crowd. Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile but real. At 8 o'clock, as the social reached its peak, the fire bell began to clang. Shouts arose from outside. "Fire at the bank! The bank's on fire!" Chaos erupted. Graham went white, shoving through the crowd to get outside. Most of the remaining men followed, including her guards. In the confusion, Mary appeared again. "This way, ma'am, quickly!" They slipped out the back of the church, where 2 horses waited. Caleb sat astride one, his face grim beneath his hat. "The bank?" Evelyn asked as he pulled her up behind him. "Amazing what a little kerosene can do. Figured Graham values his money more than his wife. I was right. Most of his men went running." He spurred the horse forward. "We don't have long. They'll realize it's mostly smoke soon enough." They rode hard through the snowy darkness, Mary keeping pace on the second horse. The girl had surprised them both, apparently. She had her own reasons for hating Graham Cartwright. "Where are we going?" Evelyn shouted over the wind. "There's a freight wagon leaving for Denver at midnight. Driver owes me a favor. We can hide in the back, be 50 miles away by dawn. What about the mine, Graham's men? We'll spend a cold night waiting for nobody. By the time they figure it out, we'll be gone." But as they rounded a bend in the trail, riders emerged from the shadows. Bill Hackett and 3 others, guns drawn. "Figured you might try something clever," Hackett said. "Boss told us to watch the back roads, just in case." Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, but Hackett shook his head. "Don't! You're fast, McKenna, but not fast enough for all of us." "Let the women go," Caleb said. "This is between me and Cartwright. Can't do that. Boss wants his wife back. Though after this stunt, I don't imagine he'll be gentle about it." Hackett's smile was ugly. As for the maid, well, she made her choice. The gunfight erupted suddenly. Mary, quiet Mary, who'd seemed so meek, produced a derringer from her coat and shot one of Hackett's men. Caleb drew and fired in the same instant, his bullet catching another gunman's center mass. Horses reared and screamed. Evelyn clung to Caleb as he wheeled their mount, firing back at the remaining men. A bullet creased his shoulder, drawing a grunt of pain. Another took Mary's horse in the neck, sending the animal down. "Mary!" Evelyn screamed. The maid rolled clear, but Hackett's gun was already tracking toward her. Caleb spurred his horse forward, putting himself between them. The bullet meant for Mary caught him in the side, spinning him half out of the saddle. "Caleb!" Evelyn grabbed for him, keeping him mounted through sheer desperate strength. Through the pain and confusion, Caleb managed one more shot. Bill Hackett toppled from his horse, clutching his chest. The last gunman, seeing his companions down, wheeled his horse and fled back toward town. "We have to move," Mary said, limping over. Her dress was torn and muddy, but she was alive. "Others will come." Caleb pressed a hand to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Can't ride far like this." "The hunter's cabin?" Evelyn said suddenly. "Graham's hunting cabin? Up on Crystal Ridge. He never uses it in winter. We can hide there, tend your wounds." It was dangerous, using Graham's own property as refuge, but they had few options. Caleb was losing blood. The alarm would soon be raised. and the snow was beginning to fall again, which would cover their tracks but also make travel treacherous. "Do it!" Caleb gasped. They rode through the swirling snow, Evelyn holding Caleb upright, Mary following on foot after catching one of the loose horses. The cabin appeared through the storm like a miracle, small but solid, with a stone chimney and stocked woodshed inside, while Mary built a fire. Evelyn examined Caleb's wounds with hands that shook. The shoulder was just a graze, but the bullet in his side had gone deep. "Needs to come out," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't know how." "I do." Mary appeared with a knife and Graham's whiskey supply. "My father was an army surgeon. I watched him work plenty of times." As Mary worked to extract the bullet, Caleb gripping Evelyn's hands through the agony. Evelyn found herself praying for the first time in years, not to the distant God of Sunday sermons, but to whatever force had brought this man into her life and might yet see them through to freedom. Outside, the storm raged on, hiding them from their pursuers but also trapping them. Come morning, Graham would tear the county apart looking for them. But for now, in this stolen moment, they were together and alive. It would have to be enough. The courtroom in Cheyenne was packed to capacity, the air thick with tobacco smoke and anticipation. Caleb sat in chains at the defendant's table, his face gaunt from 6 months of imprisonment, but his eyes still defiant. Beside him, his court-appointed lawyer, a young man named Theodore Parsons, who seemed overwhelmed by the case's notoriety, shuffled through papers nervously. In the gallery, Evelyn sat rigid as stone, her black dress severe against her pale skin. Graham had insisted she attend every day of the trial, a calculated cruelty disguised as husbandly support. She could feel his presence beside her like a cold weight, his satisfaction radiating with every damning piece of testimony. "The prosecution calls Mrs. Evelyn Cartwright to the stand." She rose on unsteady legs, avoiding Caleb's eyes as she made her way forward. They'd had no contact since that terrible morning when the federal marshals had found them at the cabin. Graham had seen to that, keeping her under virtual house arrest except for these court appearances. "Mrs. Cartwright," the prosecutor began, his voice oily with false sympathy. "I know this is difficult for you, but the court needs to hear, in your own words, about your relationship with the defendant." She gripped the rail of the witness box, her wedding ring feeling like a shackle. In the months since Caleb's capture, she'd written letter after letter to anyone who might listen. The governor, senators, even President Cleveland himself. All had gone unanswered, or returned with polite refusals. Graham's influence reached far. "He saved my life," she said quietly. "When my carriage overturned in the desert, Mr. McKenna could have left me to die. Instead, he showed me kindness. And this kindness, did it extend beyond that initial rescue?" Graham had coached her carefully on what to say, how McKenna had pursued her, threatened her, forced his attentions despite her protests. Lies that would paint Caleb as a predator and her as an innocent victim. The words sat in her throat like poison. "Mrs. Cartwright," the prosecutor prompted. She looked at Caleb then, really looked at him for the first time since entering the courtroom. His dark eyes held no accusation, only understanding. He knew what Graham had threatened, what price she would pay for the truth. And he was telling her, silently, that it was all right, that her safety mattered more than his life. But Evelyn was tired of being safe, tired of being owned. "Yes," she said clearly. "His kindness extended beyond that day. He showed me what it meant to be treated with respect, to be seen as a person rather than a possession. I fell in love with him." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's face went red. "Mrs. Cartwright, perhaps you misunderstood the question. I understood perfectly." She straightened her spine, meeting Graham's murderous gaze across the room. "I pursued him as much as he pursued me. Every meeting was consensual. Every moment we spent together was by my choice." "Your Honor," the prosecutor was sputtering now. "The witness is clearly distraught, perhaps coerced. I've been coerced all my life," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger. By my father into a marriage I didn't want. By my husband into a life of servitude disguised as luxury. The only person who never coerced me was Caleb McKenna. Judge Hammond, whom Graham had assured her was bought and paid for, banged his gavel. Mrs. Cartwright, you will answer the questions as asked or be held in contempt. Then hold me in contempt. She turned to address the packed courtroom. My husband is a thief and a blackmailer who owns half the officials in this territory. The real criminal isn't the man in chains, but the one sitting in the gallery in his expensive suit. The courtroom erupted. Graham was on his feet, his face purple with rage. The judge was banging his gavel frantically, shouting for order. Through it all, Evelyn kept her eyes on Caleb, drawing strength from the pride she saw in his face. They dragged her from the witness box, but the damage was done. Her testimony, meant to condemn Caleb, had instead exposed the corruption at the heart of Red Hollow. Reporters scribbled frantically, already composing headlines that would spread across the territory. In her cell, for Graham had indeed had her arrested for contempt, Evelyn received an unexpected visitor. Mary slipped in with the evening meal, dressed as a cleaning woman. "I've been working with Mr. Parsons," she whispered quickly. "That young lawyer has more spine than he shows. He's been gathering evidence, talking to people Graham heard over the years. Your testimony today gave them courage. They're starting to come forward. It won't matter. The judge has received a telegram from the territorial governor. Seems some federal investigators are very interested in Mr. Cartwright's banking practices. Your letters didn't go unanswered after all. They just took time to investigate quietly." Hope bloomed in Evelyn's chest. "And Caleb?" "Mr. Parsons filed an appeal based on new evidence. Turns out the man Caleb killed in Nevada had quite a reputation. 3 other men have come forward saying they saw the fight, that it was self-defense." Mary gripped her hands through the bars. "Don't give up. Not now." The retrial took place 2 months later, with a new judge and a very different atmosphere. Federal investigators had descended on Red Hollow like locusts, uncovering years of corruption. Graham's banking empire had crumbled, his assets frozen, his influential friends suddenly nowhere to be found. Evelyn sat in the gallery again, but this time as a free woman. She'd divorced Graham using the evidence of his criminal activities, forfeiting any claim to his wealth but gaining something far more valuable, her freedom. Theodore Parsons, no longer the nervous young lawyer, presented the case methodically. Witnesses testified to the true nature of the Nevada killing, a brutal attack on Caleb's younger brother by 4 men, with Caleb intervening to save the boy's life. The man who died had been wanted in 3 territories for various violent crimes. The law recognizes the right of a man to defend his family. Parsons concluded, Caleb McKenna is not a murderer. He's a brother who did what any of us would do, protected someone he loved from those who would do them harm. The real injustice is that he spent 3 years running for an act of justified defense. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they filed back in, Evelyn held her breath. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Evelyn was on her feet, tears streaming down her face as she watched them remove Caleb's chains. He stood slowly, as if not quite believing it was real. Then his eyes found hers across the crowded room. She pushed through the throng of well-wishers, reporters, and spectators. When she reached him, they stood for a moment just looking at each other, drinking in the sight after so many months apart. "You're free," she whispered. "We both are," he replied, and pulled her into his arms. They kissed there in the middle of the courthouse, surrounded by chaos and celebration, not caring who saw or what they thought. Let them gossip. Let them judge. She'd spent her whole life worrying about propriety, and it had brought her nothing but misery. Later, as they walked out into the afternoon sun, Evelyn asked, "What now?" Caleb squeezed her hand. "Now we live. Really live. Not running, not hiding, not pretending. Just living." "That sounds wonderful," she said. "Where do we start?" I got a letter from my brother while I was locked up. He's been saving my share from the farm, hoping I'd be able to use it someday. It's enough to start over. Maybe buy a little spread of our own. Oregon. If you'll have it, it's beautiful country. Green as those eyes of yours. She laughed, the sound bright and free. I'd go anywhere with you. Caleb McKenna. Haven't I proved that by now? As they walked toward their new life. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been, trapped in silk and misery, dying slowly in a cage of respectability. That woman was gone, burned away by desert sun and impossible love. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd faced down a courtroom full of powerful men and spoken truth, someone who'd chosen love over safety, freedom over comfort, authenticity over appearance. The road ahead would be hard. Starting over always was. But as she walked beside Caleb, their hands linked, their futures finally their own to shape, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. She was, at last, truly alive. Behind them, the courthouse faded into memory. Ahead, the horizon stretched endless and full of promise, and somewhere between the two, in this precious moment of transition, they were simply two people who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let go. It was, Evelyn thought, more than enough. It was everything. The Oregon Territory stretched before them like a promise kept. Green valleys folded between mountain ranges that caught clouds in their peaks. It had taken them 3 weeks to make the journey from Cheyenne, traveling with a wagon train of other families seeking fresh starts. Now, as their wagon crested the final hill, Caleb pulled the team to a halt. "There it is," he said quietly. Below them lay a piece of land that seemed carved from a dream, 40 acres of good soil bordered by a creek that sparkled in the afternoon sun. A modest cabin sat near a grove of pine trees, smoke already curling from its chimney. James McKenna emerged from the door, waving his hat in welcome. "That's your brother?" Evelyn asked, noting the resemblance despite the younger man's lighter build. "That's him. First time I've seen him in 4 years." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. The reunion was everything Evelyn had hoped for. James embraced his brother with tears streaming down his face, then turned to her with shy warmth. "Sister," he said simply, and she found herself crying too. They settled into the cabin, 2 rooms that James had been preparing since he'd gotten word of their coming. It was rough compared to the Cartwright mansion, but Evelyn had never felt more at home. That first night, as they sat around the simple table, eating stew and cornbread, she kept touching things, the wooden spoons, the clay bowls, the checked tablecloth, marveling that they were real, that this life was real. "You keep doing that," Caleb observed, catching her hand as she traced the wood grain of the table. "I keep expecting to wake up," she admitted, "to find myself back in that house, in that life." "You're here," he said firmly. "We're here, and we're never going back." The seasons turned, each one teaching them something new. Spring brought planting, Evelyn learning to guide the plow while Caleb broke the earth. Her hands, once soft and white, grew calloused and strong. She took pride in those calluses, in the dirt under her nails that spoke of honest work. Summer meant long days in the garden she'd planted behind the cabin, beans and squash, tomatoes and corn, herbs for cooking and healing. Mary had taught her the basics before they'd parted. The former maid had headed to San Francisco to start her own life, and Evelyn discovered she had a talent for making things grow. "You're smiling," Caleb said one evening, finding her among the bean rows. "Am I?" She brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a streak of dirt. "I was thinking about Graham, how appalled he'd be to see me like this, sweating in the dirt, my dress patched and repatched. Regrets? Never." She stood, stretching her back. "I was also thinking about those women in Red Hollow, the ones who used to whisper behind their fans about the banker's strange wife. I wonder if they ever imagined me happy." "Are you? Happy?" She moved into his arms, not caring that they were both dusty from the day's work. "Happier than I knew was possible." Fall brought harvest and news from the outside world. Graham Cartwright had been convicted of embezzlement and fraud, sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The Red Hollow Bank had collapsed, taking several other corrupt institutions with it. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with him. "How do you feel about it?" Caleb asked as they sat by the fire, the letter bearing the news on the table between them. Evelyn considered. "Free," she said finally. "Truly free. As long as he was out there, some part of me was still looking over my shoulder. Now," she smiled, "now that chapter is really closed." Winter arrived with a surprise morning sickness that sent Evelyn racing for the wash basin. The local midwife confirmed what she'd hardly dared hope. Come spring, there would be 3 of them in the little cabin. "A baby," Caleb said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He kissed her deeply. "Evelyn, you've given me everything. Freedom, love, a home, and now this? I didn't know a man could hold this much happiness without bursting." Hope McKenna was born as the apple trees bloomed, her lusty cries filling the cabin and announcing her arrival to the world. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and from the moment Caleb held her, she owned him completely. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling the tiny bundle while Evelyn rested. "How did we make something so perfect?" "The usual way," Evelyn said drowsily, making him laugh. They were a family now, real and whole. James visited often, doting on his niece and helping with the heavier farm work. Neighbors came to call. Drawn by Evelyn's warmth and Caleb's quiet strength, slowly, carefully, they built not just a life, but a community. 5 years passed. Hope grew from a baby to a sturdy child who followed her father around the farm and helped her mother in the garden. More children followed. Samuel, with his father's serious eyes, and little Catherine, who had her mother's laugh. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Evelyn and Caleb would sit on the porch they'd added to the cabin. These were her favorite moments, watching the sun set over their land while Caleb's arm curved around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked one such evening. "The excitement, the danger. Do you? Sometimes I dream about it. The running, the hiding, wake up with my heart racing." He pulled her closer. "Then I see you there beside me, hear the children breathing in the next room, and I remember, that was surviving. This is living." "Yes," she agreed. "This is living." It was Hope's 7th birthday when the past came calling one last time. A rider approached the farm, and Evelyn's heart clenched until she recognized him. Theodore Parsons, grayer now, but still carrying himself with quiet dignity. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," he said, accepting their offer of coffee. "I was traveling through and couldn't resist stopping to see how you were faring." They sat on the porch, watching Hope and her siblings play in the yard. Parsons smiled at the sight. "You've built something beautiful here." "We have," Evelyn agreed. "What brings you to Oregon, Mr. Parsons?" "I'm establishing a practice in Portland. Turns out successfully defending Caleb McKenna made my reputation. I've been able to help quite a few people who might not otherwise have had decent representation." "That's good work," Caleb said. "Important work. As is this." Parsons gestured to the thriving farm, the happy children. "You know, there was a time when I thought justice only lived in courtrooms. But seeing you both here, free and flourishing, this is justice too. Living well despite those who tried to break you." After he left, promising to visit again, Evelyn found herself reflecting on his words. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. Every sunrise over their fields, every laugh from their children, every quiet moment of partnership with Caleb was a victory over the forces that had tried to keep them apart. "Mama," Hope called, running up with flowers clutched in her small fist. "For you!" Evelyn knelt to accept the bouquet wildflowers mixed with roses from the bush she'd planted their first year, as she breathed in their scent. She thought about that night in Graham's garden when she'd first touched Caleb's face among the cultivated roses. How far they'd come from that stolen moment. "They're beautiful," Darling, thank you. Papa said you like flowers. Hope said seriously. He said they make you smile. Your papa's right, though you know what makes me smile most. What? You, all of you. She pulled her daughter close, looking over her head to where Caleb stood with the younger children, his face soft with love. My whole beautiful, wild, wonderful family. As the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Evelyn McKenna stood in the doorway of her home. Inside, she could hear Caleb's voice reading to the children, Hope asking her endless questions, Samuel's serious observations, Catherine's delighted giggles. Once, she had been a banker's wife, trapped in silk and propriety, dying slowly in a gilded cage. That woman was gone now, transformed by desert heat and impossible love into someone stronger, truer, free. In her place stood a farmer's wife, a mother, a woman who had chosen her own path and walked it without apology. Her hands were rough, her dresses simple, her days filled with hard work and simple pleasures, and she wouldn't trade a moment of it for all the mansions in Red Hollow. Evelyn, Caleb called. Hope wants to know if cowboys really fought dragons. I told her to ask the expert on wild stories. Laughing, she went inside to join her family. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the Oregon sky. But inside the little cabin, warmed by love and lit by laughter, the McKenna family was already home. The end. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the Wild West with Caleb and Evelyn. I hope their story of love, courage, and redemption touched your hearts as much as it did mine. Where are you listening to this tale tonight? Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of romance and adventure from the American frontier. And please share your thoughts about Caleb and Evelyn's journey. Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to love's possibilities.